Okay. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Hey. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Well, actually, as you know, I've taught you this before. Shabbat can end Wednesday night. You can do Havdalah all the way up till Wednesday night at midnight. And therefore, obviously, 12:01 on Thursday morning, you can begin with each other Shabbat Shalom and getting ready. Put your chillent up on the stove. Hope not. Anyway, it's great to see all of you. And those who are streaming from wherever you are. Betty, you said that your friend in Sweden is streaming on this?
That's what she would be doing. It's probably the middle of the night right now, so.
7 hours later, right?
Okay, well,
That's only 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, 10 o'clock at night she could be up. Okay, yes. Anyway, we had quite a lot of responses, so it's great to see all of you. And these three classes, well, first of all, it's all Judaism, right? So it's all one big subject. But these three classes are separate, but yet connected, of course. Today what we're going to do is, I'm going to give a history of the prayer book. Because some of you, oh, Lynn, but that's fine, thanks. Because you might, and actually I learned a lot from, and that's one of the things I love about teaching. How many of you were teachers? Of course, there's a Jewish group. How many of you no, okay. Lawyers, okay. Actually, a friend of ours from a long time ago, he was a, he was not the urologist, the prostate doctor. He was the dermatologist doctor. Okay, so he was a dermatologist and a lawyer. So you know the expression, I want to become a doctor, lawyer, and what? Indian chief. So he actually went out west to a certain, I don't know what tribe he went to, but you can actually take a course for a day, and at the end of the day become a certified Indian chief. So he actually did that. So he was a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. I thought if you have nothing else to do with your life, that's really cool. Okay? Yeah, really cool. So anyway, I'm going to give and one of the lovely things about teaching is that you have to prepare, hopefully, or at least think about what you're doing. So I've never really given a history of the prayer book, which will take not too much time, maybe 15 minutes, maybe. And then I'm going to take you into the structure of the Jewish prayer service. And that's going to be today. And keep this in mind because we're going to continue this discussion of the Jewish prayer service sometime next season, so to speak, when I will then do specifically the Shabbat service, but also probably we'll see how it works out, but also take us into the High Holy Days and the Machzor, which is a different book than the Siddur, which we'll be looking at today. But then next week, for those of you who are interested, we're preparing, of course, we're in the shoot, so to speak, before Pesach. It's only a couple of weeks away. So next week, we're going to look at the Haggadah, or I like to say it's easy just saying Haggadah, okay, it comes out faster. So the Haggadah, okay, Haggadah, okay. And with the Haggadah, is that I'm going to look at the parts of the Haggadah that you probably skipped over, unless you are totally traditional or you with grandpa sometime in the past, and he went through the whole thing in Hebrew or Yiddish, worse, in the sense that you probably didn't understand one word that he was doing. Hi, how you doing? And then, and that's going to be next week. And then the third one is we are into beginning on the second night of Passover, the counting of the Omer, Sefirat Omer, which I will explain what that is. But then there is a very powerful and meaningful meditation used with Kabbalistic meditations. So it's going to be a class on Kabbalah, as well as counting of the Omer. And for any of you want to, I put that in my message. I'll repeat that again. This week's message. If you're so inclined, you could buy my book on Amazon, which actually is made up of 49 poems reflecting upon each day of the counting of the Omer. So everyone's focused on this, right, Laura? Okay, Laura is going to be bat mitzvah on May 3rd, along with four other women from the temple. And so she's in the shoot, as they say. Oy, 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 shoot me, right? Okay, God forbid. Okay, so those of you who've taken classes with me before know that the way I want to always start a class is by the traditional blessing. For those of you not familiar with it, we'll do it nice and slowly so you can say one word after me at a time, and eventually you'll actually know it by heart. So we begin, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kideshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Amen. Oh, Jane. Oh, it's in the kitchen of that door. Yeah, okay. Which means we give you thanks, O Lord our God, for commanding us to be engaged in the study of Torah. Okay, so you're not gonna need those prayer books, but you can keep them on your lap if you want to. Or if there's an empty book by your seat, there's an empty chair by your seat, because this is going to be the history part. Okay. First of all, as I mentioned, there are basically two prayer book types that we use in our Judaism, our Jewish, quotes, religious life. One is called a Siddur, and the other is called a Machzor. Now, a Siddur does sound like what? Seder, because similar to that, it means an order or arrangement of prayers. Whereas Machzor, which I'll talk about in the fall, means to be returning. And every year, the Rosh Hashanah returns year after year after year. So they are two very different books, and two very different purposes. And we'll look in a few moments at when we look at this prayer book. So the history. The development of the Siddur, that is the book you have here, can be traced back to the times of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the first temple was built by King Solomon around the year 1000 BCE, before the Common Era. Whereas the Second Temple was built they began building it because that temple was destroyed in the year 576 BCE by the Babylonians. And then somewhere in the 300s or so, they started rebuilding it slowly, and it was basically built and destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. So we're talking about the Second Temple, was certainly finished by King Herod, who, by the way, was not a Jew, but rather was the Roman designated governor of what was called at that time Palestine. And no, it has no relationship to the Palestine or whatever today with the Palestinians, because the Roman word for Israel was Palestina. Why? Because it was based upon the Hebrew word, or in English today, the Philistines, because the Romans believed that the Philistines were the first to actually occupy that area, going back thousands of years before that, even before Abraham, let us say. So anyway, the prayer book, the Siddur, is approximately 2,000 years old. Now, while communal prayer, that is people getting together like we do on Friday nights and Saturdays, was an integral part of Jewish worship, it wasn't until the period following the destruction of the temple that a standardized prayer text began to emerge. Over time, Jewish sages and scholars compiled and codified the prayers that we have today, resulting in the creation of the first Siddur or prayer book. And as I go along with this, you'll be amazed as to when that was. Some of you would have thought, 2,000 years ago, or the time of Moses. No, it is much more relatively so recent than that. By the way, as I'm rambling along here, if I say something which you really don't understand, just raise your hand and I'll try as best to clarify a point. Okay. And we'll have questions and answers, obviously, after I complete this. Okay, so I want to point something out. That way before, and you'll see in a few moments that it's actually discussed or mentioned in the Mishnah, one of the important early books of Jewish law and tradition and culture, is that Jews prayed, obviously. Even though much of Jewish life, religious life, was focused on what? The temple in Jerusalem. And before that, as we wandered in the desert for the 40 years before coming into the Holy Land, in the place called the Mishkan, or the sanctuary, which was basically a portable tent with an altar and the Ark of the Covenant, etc., which was a tent because it traveled with our ancestors as they slept through the desert. But ultimately, hi Marsha, under King Solomon, it was built around the year 1000, a permanent place called the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. Now, the basis of religious worship as described in the Torah going back to that time was a cultic, C-U-L-T-I-C, religion. Not a cult, but cultic. What does that mean? The average Hebrew, the average Jew, could not simply say a prayer to God. Well, you could say, thank you, God, okay? But on the other hand, the system was developed that in order for one's prayers to truly be sent to God, the divine, the transcendent God, is that it had to be done in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And also it had to be done through a Kohen, through a priest. By the way, you all are familiar with this from your Catholic friends and neighbors. In other words, can a Catholic, an individual Catholic, all by himself or herself, take some wine, eat some bread, and do communion to themselves? No, it's impossible. And even you must go through an ordained Catholic priest. And even a nun doesn't hold water in this case. A nun cannot offer communion. Whether that's right or wrong, that's another discussion, and not even for here because we're Jews, okay? But the fact is that the average Catholic cannot do communion. You have to do it through a priest. Well, 3,000 years ago, the average Hebrew or Jew could not offer a sin offering or thanksgiving offering, or was called a peace offering to bring peace in one's life, etc., without going through a Kohen. And therefore, you had to schlep. Or at one time, before the Holy Temple in Jerusalem was built, there were various altars all around Israel. And you would go to the Kohen and to the altar, the holy place. You just couldn't do these offerings and prayers anywhere you wanted to. You had to go to the place where they believed God lived, God dwelled. This was the house of God. That was the system. Whether you understand this or not, whether you accept it or not, it doesn't matter. This was the system. But the question then rises is what? Let's say a person wants to say, thank you, God. And anywhere in Israel, but they don't want to schlep to Jerusalem, okay? Especially in those days. So for instance, the last time I was in Israel for my 150-mile bike ride, obviously the plane lands at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, and I had to take a train to Jerusalem. Well, even the train took an hour. Okay, so imagine having to schlep there in ancient times from different places outside of the holy city. So the fact is what? The question then arises, what about a person who lived outside of the confines of Jerusalem? What about a person who lived outside of Israel? Jews were living all over the place, even in ancient times. They certainly were living in Egypt. They certainly were living in various parts of North Africa. They probably were living in places up further north and possibly into Europe as well. There's some discussion as to whether Jews were even in further east, possibly into the Far East. So Jews are at different places. They have a sense of they being Jewish, but they say, well, I can't get there. I can't get there. So can't I say a prayer to God? Well, obviously one could. We don't have any record of how Jews prayed communally. One thing is an individual. You go, oh, okay. Some of you might remember the wonderful recording of the 2,000-year-old man with Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, I believe. And the 2,000-year-old man, Mel Brooks, was asked, were you present when the first person ever prayed? And Mel Brooks said, yes, I was the first person who ever prayed to God. And so Carl Reiner says to him, well, what was that prayer? Well, you see, there was this huge giant whose name was Phil, and he was coming closer and closer and closer to me. And so the first prayer anyone ever offered was, oh, Phil, don't step on me. Okay, so obviously you could offer a prayer anywhere. So what did Jews do? Well, we're going to see. Outside of the holy place in Jerusalem, which ultimately affected the development of the communal service. The Mishnah, many of you are familiar with this word, the Mishnah. The Mishnah was codified and written down in the year 200 of the Common Era. For those of you not familiar with the designation, there is, of course, on the Christian view of history, everything revolves around what? The birth and life of Jesus. So like, for instance, this year is 2025. 2025 years ago, Jesus was born, right? So therefore, there's BC, before Christ, and AD, Antedomino, after his death. Whereas we in Judaism do not refer to history in that way, but when we want to deal with, so this is 5,785, as you know, in the Jewish view of creation. But another way of designating before and after with Jesus, you could say BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era. Okay. The Mishnah was written in the year 200 of the Common Era, and it was written in Israel. And it is basically the record of the discussions of the rabbis at that time about Jewish life. Some of the Mishnah was written before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, meaning before 70. So there are large sections of the Mishnah which describe all of the rituals and the ceremonies of the Kohanim in the ancient temple in Jerusalem, to such great detail that if the third temple in Jerusalem is ever rebuilt, literally people could go to the Kohanim, people of the last name Cohen, Katz, etc., could literally go to work the next day. It is in such great detail. Okay, so the Mishnah in its first section or book, technically called the tractate, everyone following me, okay? Blink your eyes 3 times if you haven't fallen asleep yet. Okay. In the section called Barachot says the following. From when may one recite the Shema in the evening? And they say, one person said, from the time when the Kohanim go in to eat their evening meal until the end of the first watch. So said Rabbi Eliezer. And the other rabbi said up until midnight. And Rabbi Gamliel said until the break of dawn. So there's in the very first Mishnah, there is already a discussion about when one does say the Shema at night. Notice it doesn't say when Jews get together, they say the Shema. It says, when does one person say the Shema? Up until what point in time? Because you might say, well, what's the difference? But remember, the saying of the Shema is based upon the V'ahavta prayer, where it says very specifically, you shall say the Shema twice a day, when you get up and when you go to sleep. Well, in the morning and in the evening. But when does evening begin and when does evening end? When does morning begin and when does morning end? So there are parameters that they set up. In other words, you can't say the Shema anytime you want to. Although I must say, I had a friend, when she flew, she didn't really know the prayer. There's a prayer for saying a prayer. There's a whole prayer service when you get on an airplane. If anyone wants a copy of it, especially these days, I'll be glad to give it to you. However, you can always say, "Oi, don't step on me." Okay, but the fact is that there's a prayer service, but you can't. She would say the Shema on the plane before it took off. Okay, but technically you can't do that. You can say it in the morning. You say it in the evening. So therefore, what? We begin to see that, guess what? Jews did say the Shema whenever they wanted to, within certain parameters, day and night. Which means what also? Jews knew of the V'ahavta prayer, and they knew of the prayer Shema Yisrael. Linda?
Israel as a country, and one of the places that they went by umbrella is 200 years before the Common Era, who were taken as slaves in Greece.
Oh, yeah.
And then they became the rabbis and rabbis and not now.
Yeah. It's interesting also. Yeah, so Jews were in many, many places. So we begin to learn, if you want to say, if someone were to ask you, well, what did Jews pray? Is it either when they got together or when they wanted to say a prayer? they said the Shema Yisrael prayer. So we begin to learn how ancient that is because you're talking about at least 2,000 years ago. Okay. And probably even before that. What's interesting is it also says the following in another part of the Mishnah, the following. The following can be said in any language. That's like Linda said. You can say it in Hebrew if you're in Israel. You can say it in Greek, in Greece, in Turkey. You can say it in Turkish. If you're in Italy, you can say it in Italian. So 2,000, remember, this is written down in this book, the Mishnah, in the year 200. That's what, 1,900 years ago, 1,800 years ago? It says that you can say the following anytime you want to in any language. One, the paragraph in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, about a woman suspected of adultery. Now, why would anyone want to say that anytime is another question. Okay. The declaration of tithes, in other words, paying 10% of your income to the temple in Jerusalem from Deuteronomy. The recitation of the Shema, also the blessings after meal, and also certain oaths or promises that you would make regarding certain financial transactions. So what this means then is that Jews outside of the temple area in Jerusalem had certain practices, meaning what? They knew Torah and they knew things to say because after all, what didn't they have? They had no books. So the question is, how did people know these things? Because they learned it what? Audially. They knew them and they memorized them. Another example of a law regarding the Shema comes also from the Mishnah, regarding the language in which you can say it. And so therefore, again, the bottom line is, as far as what Jews prayed or could pray, is the following 2,000 years ago. At least the Shema, other things we just read about. Also, number two is they recited, guess what? The 10 Commandments. Okay. But what's very interesting about the Shema is the Shema a prayer? Declaration. Because after all, we say the Shema to whom? To each other. Shema, Angela, Adonai. Okay, we say to each other. Israel, Shema Yisrael. We don't say Shema Adonai because if God knows anything, God knows God is one. We don't tell God you're one. God knows it. We're saying it to each other, right? So notice, in any of these things, they are what? They are inspirations, affirmations. The Shema, the laws, how to deal with things, the V'ahavta prayer, the 10 Commandments, how to live life. Does it mean that a Jew could not pray to God? Of course, but we have no record of actually any words of prayer that Jews said before the next part of my talk. Bill?
Very interesting, you said, Rabbi, that there were no books. And in order for them to learn it, they had to learn it orally. Who made up the oral part?
Aha. Okay. Good. Oh, good question, Rabbi. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bill's question is, who made up the oral part? Well, first of all, it's a good question because guess what? There weren't rabbis yet. Okay. The whole idea of the rabbis came about after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So there weren't even rabbis yet. So who's teaching them? There were groups of what are called sofrim, or writers. These were people who, I guess, I'm assuming they were itinerants traveling around, and they might have had something written with these things down. And probably Jews would gather together and they would teach. There's a whole question as to when there was the first Torah, was when there were the earliest Torah scrolls. And most probably they have to do with I'll talk about this in a minute, with Ezra in the year 400 BCE. Okay, but they didn't carry Torah scrolls around with them. They had probably these writings on pieces of parchment or something, and the Sofrim were the writers. But everything depended upon what? Listening. And unfortunately, today many people have gotten away from listening. Well, yeah, that was much later on. After destruction, after the Second Temple. Yeah. We have no idea what kept Jews together in Babylonia during the first dispersion to there after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. There's no record as far as I know. Linda. Why do you say that? Oh, it does? Oh, okay.
They were taken so that.
Most often, and again, to answer Bill's question, there obviously were itinerant teachers, which makes sense, who were learned in this, where they learned it. Did they learn it? Have to go to Israel to learn it, or other places? We don't have any record of this whatsoever. What's very interesting then is what you have you have the chance then for what a lot of discrepancies in your teachings, to say the least, and what the words are. Because and you certainly have no consistency in practices, right? When do you say this? When do you say that? Which is why we have this book, which I mentioned to you, called the Mishnah. The Mishnah has 6 sections to it, tractates. However, the Mishnah obviously could not cover all of Jewish life wherever Jews were. It's dealing basically with the land of Israel, number one, and there's no question we have some other books written, copies of them, of other discussions in other places. But you can imagine a lot is left out and unknown. Carol, you have a question?
Even they still, and you just give different about.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, you were not setting for a doctrine.
And even today they disagree. Okay, so find out in a few minutes. Okay, so Lynn back there. Yeah, Lynn, I'll give you the microphone this time. Oh, it's on. It's on, so I don't have to play with it.
I seem to remember from a million years ago in my past life that my grandmother taught me, just like we teach the kids to count 3 stars on a Saturday night, my grandmother taught me to count 3 stars to say the bedtime Shema.
Yeah, I mean, there's different, right, that's one of the customs. It actually says in the Mishnah that evening starts with 3 stars, exactly. Okay, so we now know, and we're going to look into the prayer book in a few moments. But now you're talking about a very abbreviated. You finish. You go to the Oneg very quickly because just have to say the Shema. Then you have to pray the 10 Commandments. You'd be eating about 5 minutes, right? Okay. We have no record of any other prayers that are being said. And remember, when a person, let us say, wanted to make an official sin offering, they didn't say anything. They brought their goat, schlepped their goat, hundreds of miles or more or less to the temple in Jerusalem. They went up the southern exposure, the steps. There was a person waiting there at the door. They took their goat. You say, well, this goat is for a sin offering that I made. And then and that's it. The person doesn't say anything at all. Okay? It doesn't have to say anything at all. And so what you really get a sense of in this early period of time, which is why the creation of a prayer book is really quite amazing. So think about the prayer service itself. And those of you, most of you, I look around, come to services at various times, so you know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to look into this in a few moments when we look specifically at it. But you have the opening prayers, and you have introductory prayers, and you have the Shema, the Baruch Hu, right? And the Shema. And then what you have is what I always say, is you hear me say this every time we have services, let us stand for the tefillah. And I use these words, which is the essential part of our worship service. Why? Because everything else so far is what? Us doing what? We're not asking God anything. We're either praising God, thanking God, or we're simply affirming our belief in God, such as the Shema, right? But now, this tefillah prayer, called the Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions, the 18 words to God, that is really the essential part of the service. And we'll look at that in a few moments, but you know this is the part about Ruach Atah Adonai, you know what we're talking about, right, everybody? Okay. The Amidah, or the essential part of the service, was attributed to the Great Assembly at the time of Ezra between the years 480 and 440 BCE. So what's very interesting now is that notice what? I said we really don't know what Jews were praying before the later part, which I mentioned before, in terms of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. But already Ezra, not in writing, Bill, but rather audially, began to develop this idea of saying 18 benedictions, 18 different prayers to God for peace, for good health, for well-being, for financial success, so to speak, or not financial want. And so therefore, Ezra really becomes the critical one. He lived 480 to 440 BCE, 40 years old. And most scholars do say that he was the one to create the first Sefer Torah. And actually some scholars, traditional scholars, do say that there were never a Moses, there would be an Ezra to create Judaism. It was very important. Now, in the Mishnah, again, the year 200, they're now talking about this, what Ezra had created, the 18 benedictions. Rabbi Gamliel says, every day one should pray the 18 benedictions. Rabbi Joshua says, the abstract of the 18 benedictions, in other words, abbreviate them. Rabbi Akiva says, if he's very fluent in his Hebrew, then he should say all 18 of them. And our rabbis have taught the following. Rabbi Shimon, the cotton dealer, arranged the 18 benedictions in order of the presence of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel said to the sages, is there anyone who knows how to word the benediction, relating it to those who don't believe in what we're even talking about? And this other rabbi, Samuel the Small, stood up. I guess he was kind of short. Okay. So what do we learn from this? That obviously 2,000 years ago, there was a tremendous amount of discussion. Ezra, so if that's 2,000 years ago, and Ezra was 400 BCE, for 400 years, there has, and Ezra was in Israel, okay? He is one of the main, he was one of the main forces of the Jews returning from Persia. Yes?
It's okay.
Oh, yeah, this guy there is emptying the garbage pail.
No, it's the food,
The food guy.
food pantry.
We're feeding people, it's good.
It's fine.
Yeah, he can't help
Question,
it.
Rabbi,
Huh?
question. You mentioned something about doing things for people that don't believe. What was that you said?
Well, there was a group called Minim, who were part of the Jewish community who were disbelievers. And this rabbi was having a big discussion, and there's actually part of the 18 benedictions is where specifically it says that the Minim should be eliminated from the Jewish community. Yeah. Yes. Oh, Linda.
There was the prayer that, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, and so on. That was written on the outside of the doors, and that's been around for a long time. I don't know whether it was the women or the men who wrote it, but it was on the doors of all of those 4-room structures that were the very beginning in the land of Israel, that were evidence that Jews had come into the land.
Oh, only for saying, Linda, I'm not doubting you, but I never heard of that.
Okay.
Okay.
That's in archaeology today.
Oh, okay, archaeology then. Interesting. So in other words, you had this for over 400 years, you had these prayers that the rabbis 400 years later were discussing. When do you say them? How do you say them? How many you say? When do you say them? Say them fast, say them slow. But they still weren't what? They weren't written down anywhere because you had no books. 2,000 years ago, there were parchments, okay, and obviously scrolls of various sorts, but the average person had nothing. Okay. So now what? So from the time of Rabbi Gamliel in the year 80, which was 10 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, till a great rabbi, the next great name here, Rav Amram Gaon, whose name is Amram, Amram, who died in the year 870 of the Common Era. So you're talking about a long time further in history. He was, by the way, Halim, he was the Gaon or head of one of the important academies in Babylonia in the 9th century Surah. There wasn't necessarily a specific prayer book, but it was a bit arbitrary depending on each synagogue and style of the community, as long as the Shema, the Amidah, and the priestly benedictions were said. In other words, there were obviously amongst communities, Jews getting together now, okay, in Babylonia now, because Jerusalem basically ceased to exist there were some Jews living in Jerusalem and Israel, but very few. Most of them are now living in Babylonia, which is Iraq of today. And apparently when they got together as a community, they said the Shema, the Amidah, and the Yivarechacha prayer, the priestly blessing. But guess what? Without any priest being there, right? There's no temple in Jerusalem. And he was, Amram, was the first one to create the official Siddur, or the first prayer book. So if you wanted to walk away with anything today, and you would have this knowledge that the first prayer book in the Jewish community was written by Amram Gaon, the head Rabbi Amram, in the year 875 approximately of the Common Era in Babylonia. Amazing, right? So that's pretty late. All that time beforehand, there was no prayer book for the Jewish community living in Babylonia. The question still becomes, what about the ones living in Jerusalem? Well, and it's still in Israel. What about those in Europe? What about those wherever? Okay, that's another question. After Amram, Jewish rabbis, Jewish philosophers, and others began to add to this prayer book many of the prayers that we have today, and adding to that, so that there was additions, editing, and tweaking along the way. But keep in mind, all of this time, the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, what was there not yet? Printing press. Okay, the earliest printed prayer book that we have is from the year 1486, printed by the famous Soncino family in Italy. Okay, Soncino prayer book is the first one, 1486. That's amazing, right? Eric?
How similar or different is it to what we use today, or even the Orthodox use today?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. Well, the basic parts are still there. Obviously, you have the Shema, the Filah, etc. I can't really answer the specifics of it, because obviously, from that one, the Soncino, be interesting. I'm assuming that I know that there is somewhere a copy, maybe more than one, of the Amram prayer book from the 800s, from the 5th century. There is a copy of the Amram prayer book. I'm not sure about the Soncino, but most probably it is. Helene can go look it up later, and maybe the temple could purchase that one. We'll mortgage off this whole. We'll put another mortgage on the bill. Put another mortgage on the building here. However, during this period of time, and actually this leads me in, and I thank Eric for that comment, because it leads into this next part, and that is, the Soncinos printed a prayer book. But do you think it was accepted by everyone? No. Okay. There were many disagreements among various communities, how the prayer should be said, what should be said, in what order should they be said. And then, of course, you get into variations as well as additions and subtractions of them. There's the agreement, you got to say the Baruch Hu, you got to say the Shema, you're going to have the Kaddish, and there's indications, and Jewish law, and the great rabbis such as Maimonides and whatnot would indicate when these things are said, and when you can say them or not say them. You need a minyan and all that whole question of 10 men. But the fact is that there were many, many different variations and versions of the prayer book throughout the world. Basically, there is what? There's the Ashkenazi version, which is the Eastern European version. There's the Italian Nusach version, which is called the Romani version of Italians, which is sort of like based upon the Ashkenazi, but very different. So some of you might, in your readings, or come across the Romanisha version, the Romans, the Italians. There's, of course, the Sephardi one, like in Linda's family in Greece, okay? Remember, the Sephardic indication is Jews from Spain, the Mediterranean area, North Africa, and then Israel, and coming around Italy, and then coming around to Israel, obviously. And then there's the Nusach Ari, which is the Kabbalistic or the Hasidic one, the Kabbalistic one. And then there's the Spanish, and then there's the Portuguese, and it goes on and on. And then there's the Reform, and the various Reform ones. And then you can go Meshuggah with all of this. Okay, to give you the perfect example, I brought with me 3 prayer books. Oh, Angela, come and do me a favor. Hold that one up. Okay. Come this way over here. This is Angela. Everyone, thank you, Angela. Okay. You're hired? Okay. Stand there, look good. Okay, you always look good. Okay. So anyway, I have 3 prayer books here. They look very different, right? Obviously, duh. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, they are all Orthodox, number 1, and they are all Kabbalistically oriented. In other words, Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. And yet, look, aside from the, first of all, different shapes, but leaving aside that, this one is a Breslov Siddur. Breslov is one of the Hasidic communities, and small only because I cheaped out, I got the pocket version. And Linda, it's hard even to read, forget about it. Okay. Anyway, I wanted to have this, and so this is the Breslov version of the prayers. This one, and Nachman of Breslov lived in the 1700s. He was one of the Hasidic Rebbes from Eastern Europe, from the town of Breslov, obviously. He was buried in Uman, and in 2020, I think it was, I had the privilege of actually visiting his grave and saying prayers at his grave. Anyway, that's where he's from, and his followers have this version of the prayer book. This one is by also an 18th century, 1700s Kabbalistic rabbi whose name is Shalom Sharabi. He lived in Yemen. Yeah, there were no Houthis yet, thank God. Unbelievable. Okay, anyway, and by the way, in the 1700s, there was a very, very powerful and large Yemenite Jewish community. And much of Kabbalah was affected, and the development of Kabbalah was affected by the rabbis who came from Yemen, of all places. Anyway, this is his book. Now, by the way, this one, I was able to get it in auction. This is a first edition. This is the first prayer book of Shalom Sharabi ever published in Jerusalem. Okay, because he ended up leaving Yemen and going to Jerusalem and starting his own synagogue there. And this is from 1911. Yeah, 1911 Jerusalem. Okay, but now this is a Kabbalistic book, and this is like nothing else. Laura, do me a favor, since I could hold it like this and don't break the binding. Stand up, and you're gonna hold it like this since you're the Torah holder, and just bring it around slowly and let everyone see. Okay, now, this book is the Siddur of Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, as he is called, who also 1700s, okay, duh, and guess what? He is from Italy, okay? And another one, 1700s, same century, this one, that one, the one that Laura is showing you, okay, this is his text, in his version, Chaim Luzzatto, L-U-Z-A-T-T-O. And if I remember correctly, I think he comes from Calabrese, okay, with Michael Corleone or something. Okay, but anyway, the fact is, actually, I think he was from Calabrese. But the fact is, to answer Eric's question, here you have 3 Kabbalistic Siddurim prayer books, and yet they all differ from each other in certain ways. The way it's written, and if the Kabbalistic ones, the meditations and whatnot in them, but also in some cases, the order of some of the prayers. And what they also did was they would add certain things like piyutim or poems. that especially the Sephardim love poems because the Sephardim are more romantic than the Eastern European Jews, with them, especially the Germans. They ain't romantic. Okay. I should say that, but right. Okay, so it's very dramatic, right? Okay. But anyway, and a modern example is take, for instance, where as you know, Judy and I live in Boynton Beach, and we're on Military and Boynton Beach Boulevard in Palm Chase, and around the corner on El Claire. I always thought it was A Claire before I saw it. I said, boy, there's A Claire Street around behind the corner. Wow, that's really great. I can't wait to go there. Must be some great stuff to eat, but it's El Claire. Anyway, in El Claire, some of you might be familiar. You've seen this. There's, of course, the Chabad of Boynton Beach, right? Quite a nice facility. I went there a number of times. And then that's enough, right? Maybe 50 yards away, there's another shul, okay? And this goes back again to Eric's excellent question. So why do you have two shuls, Orthodox, 50 yards away from each other? Well, the Chabad, the first one, the Chabad of Boynton Beach, they follow the Sephardi ritual of their version of Chabad. And there's a Chabad Siddur also, by the way. And they follow the Sephardic version. But there were Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe who didn't like that version. So they spent a tremendous amount of money and built another shul 50 yards away. Okay. So what's amazing going back to this whole thing is, yes, there obviously is a tradition of Siddur, of some kind of, first of all, Jews have always prayed. Okay. And we've been able to, as you can tell, pray, number one, without a temple in Jerusalem, unfortunately. And number two is we're able to pray on our own. On the other hand, as you know, in Orthodox Judaism, traditional Judaism, there's certain prayers you can't say on your own. You're not allowed to say the Baruch Hu to open the service. You cannot say Kaddish on your own without a minyan. And you also can't read Torah without a minyan. Okay. And on the other hand, is that the fact is that Jews also, regardless of all of our differences, still the fact is, no matter what, whether you're Breslov, whether you're Babavar, whether you're the Belzer, whether you're modern Orthodox, whether you're conservative, whether you're Reform, whether you're Reconstructionist, whether you're Renewal, it doesn't matter. Every one of us has a prayer book. And what I'm going to show you now is, as we look at this, our prayer book, is that the beauty to me of Judaism is, first of all, in the development of this is absolutely amazing. And let me tell you, and I don't know how many have ever tried to write your own prayers. It's one thing to write a prayer that you say, okay, this speaks to me. Okay, I've been able to express whatever feelings I have about God, whatever my needs are at that moment. But let me tell you, to write a prayer that other people can read and say that's beautiful is not easy at all. Okay, the fact that the rabbis over these centuries were able to create the Siddur that we are the recipients of, and the beauty of it is it doesn't matter what kind of a Jew you are, all of us have a Siddur. And you can see the complicated development of this. And I think the key and the complication was what, as Bill was alluding to before, is that so much of it in the beginning was oral. And how was that transmitted? And until you had a printing press, where at least you can begin to say, okay, all of us have the same material. You all have the same prayers. Before that, it was very difficult to be able to develop this. Linda. Yeah, go ahead. Solomon, yeah.
Solomon Schechter, who was a relative of mine, a cousin of my grandfather or grandmother, whichever it was, all the way back there in Romania, was a person who rewrote the book to be conservative instead of orthodox. That was one of his tasks that he did in order to start the conservative movement in the United States.
Well, that's a whole other story about conservative Judaism. They obviously they took out certain prayers to make it more amenable and enjoyable for more modern Jews as conservative. And obviously Reform even went further. Yes, Norman.
Blessing and the reading of the Ten Commandments.
Right, or reciting them, yeah.
The two of them continue, and the reading of the Ten Commandments has disappeared.
Yeah, we should do it. We should bring it back, right?
I mean, was there a reason?
I don't know. I'm not sure of the reason, but they left it, they took it out. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know of any prayer book that has the 10 Commandments in it, really. Okay, so take your prayer book now. So that's the history. I know that some of you are saying, well, there's a lot of holes in that history. Well, yeah, there are. We don't have a lot of record as to what Jews did specifically in many, many places throughout the world. Again, because there was no printing, there was no paper, there was no way to transmit what one community versus another community did. But notice eventually it all kind of came together with Rav Amram, who I mentioned, and then Ezra, Amram, and then of course with the printing press in the 15th century. That, and we take it for granted, right? But the effect of the printing press is almost like obviously the difference between having a horse-drawn carriage and a horseless carriage, right? I mean, what the automobile did to the world is absolutely unimaginable, right? Same thing with computers, obviously. There's certain things that literally changed the world. And one of them certainly was the printing press, right? Okay, everyone turn to the table of contents. These are the books we use, so it's Hebrew opening. Now, certainly, if I were to take a Orthodox prayer book, it would be different. There are things that are not in a Reformed prayer book that are in a conservative and certainly in Orthodox. No question of it. But I will say the following to you. It doesn't matter. And this to me is what's so wonderful about Judaism, and which is why, and I know I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, and that is, there are some of my Reformed colleagues who don't feel as comfortable as I do. I can go into any shul at all. I don't care. And I can daven and I can pray with the best of them. And the fastest of them, I must say. It took a long time to be able to, not that that's a goal, it should not be, but in some of these Orthodox shuls, it's amazing how fast they go. But the fact is guess what? Because what I'm now going to show you, it doesn't matter what the denomination is that every one of them today follows the same rubric, the same tree. Okay, so you'll notice looking obviously on the left-hand column, prayers for weekdays. And that's what we're going to focus on now. And again, of course, as you all should know, the Jewish day begins when? Sundown, correct? Not at midnight. Okay. And so notice, of course, as the Torah began, and there was evening, and there was morning, and first day, second day, etc. The day begins the evening before. Okay, so therefore weekday evening comes first, then morning, then afternoon, and then evening and morning. Okay, and we're going to now check this out by turning to page 2. Okay, and I know for us as moderns, and by the way, where you get into some of the changes with renewal movements and some, like for instance, Lador Vador. Well, not Lador Vador, well, that was whatever, cosmic Judaism. But there's a synagogue in Boynton Beach now with Rabbi Mark Leibowitz. Some of you might know Mark. Yeah, Delray right now, Delray, .org, and that's renewal. Okay. So you're going to get more changes and whatnot. It's going to be a much looser kind of a service, but the basics are still there. But the service, remember, when was the service begun to be written? 2,000 years ago. Why? Because the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed by the Romans, and Judaism should have been destroyed then when kaput, but the rabbis revived it and reinvented it and said, guess what? 3 times a day, offerings were presented in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem by the Kohanim. There's no longer a temple. There's no longer functioning place for functioning Kohanim. So every one of us stands in the place of the Kohen of ancient times. So just as he offered prayers nighttime, morning, and evening, we can offer prayers nighttime, morning, and evening. And as you've heard me, those of you who come to services have heard me say this before, we therefore stand in the place of the Kohen. 3 times a day if you want to pray 3 times a day. Obviously, Orthodox 3 times a day. Conservative 3 times a day. Okay, so if you imagine 2,000 years ago, and by the way, this is very similar to the whole thing about the Passover ritual as well. They are very much influenced by what? The Roman society in which they were living. And the Roman society is what? It is a royal, regal oriented society. Who is in charge of your life? The king. And therefore, in terms of our religious services, it is the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, God. So just as I wouldn't go up to a king and say, hey, yo, king, what's going on? You want to listen to me or not? Okay. You go up to a king with a great deal of what? A great deal of respect, solemnity, because guess what? That king can chop your head off any moment, right? Okay. So therefore, many of the aspects of this ritual are based upon the model of the servant before the king. And that creates, therefore, a very distinct mindset. So when you go up to a king, so let's say, for instance, I want to ask Laura a favor. I would say, you know, Laura, you're really a great person. You're a fantastic woman, and you're just a fantastic member of our synagogue, and you are really the best in every single way. Could you do me a favor and pick up some groceries for me tomorrow? Because, okay, if I just went up to Laura and said, hey, can you help me out here? She might have I don't know, I know Laura would do it anyway, I'm sure. But the fact is, it's not that we're trying to bribe God, but you want to first what? Acknowledge God's presence. So the service is based upon, no matter what service you're talking about, is based upon acknowledging the presence of God. Okay. So, if we turn now to page 4. Now it's very interesting. Let's see, maybe I should change it a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to change it a bit. All right, so notice here you have the Baruch Hu. The Baruch Hu, we do what? With our body. We stand, number one, because guess what? I'll never forget many decades ago when I was with the New York State Police as one of the chaplains, and I was asked to go up to Albany to offer an invocation at the graduation of the New York State Troopers, one of the graduations of the troopers. And that's when Mario Cuomo, remember him, some of you? Yeah, Mario, okay, was the governor. And literally, we were standing around, and of course, politicians are always late. I think they do this on purpose, sort of like a king or a queen. They're always going to be late. They want to make people wait for them. Okay, that's part of that shtick. Okay. So anyway, we're waiting around, it's holding up the whole graduation and whatnot. And when he walked in, you thought that the Pope walked in. Everyone immediately almost jumps to attention. Okay. It was really gross, I thought. I mean, really, he's just another citizen who got elected to this being governor. And they actually, when people walked, they almost like kissed his ring almost. It was really terrible. But the fact is that you want to be at attention. So when we begin the service with the Baruch Hu, what do? We stand up. Okay. But notice also, as I said before, when you are before a royalty or a king, what do? You bow. Okay, now, I don't know how many of you saw The Crown, the TV show, the Netflix. I love The Crown. Okay, so what do? So let's say, for instance, Norman is King Norman. Okay, Norman, and if I came up to you, I go like this. Right? I love that. I do this to Judy all the time, it drives her nuts. Okay, yeah. I'll stand by the side of the car, open the door for her and go like this. She says, stop that. You don't have to do that, okay? I just want to show my obeisance. Okay, so anyway, I wish it worked that way. But anyway, is that they did that. But actually, what do? We Baruch Hu et Adonai. Okay, so we begin doing what? The service begins that way. But actually, and it's interesting, in the Reform Prayer Book, which is a whole nother, we could study the development of the Reform Prayer Book. But let us turn to, let's see if I got this right. Yeah, okay, very good. Page 30. So the Reform Prayer Book has different services. Some are shorter, some are longer. It depends upon the congregation and the person praying them. And by the way, you can pray the service, except for the Baruch Hu, by yourself at home, if you wanted to, obviously. But on page 30, we have prayers before the Baruch Hu. Because let's say, for instance, you are visiting a king. You just don't walk into the palace, knock on the door and just walk in. Okay. You have to do what? You have to be prepared for that. So there are introductory prayers, getting yourself ready for when you're going to meet the king. Notice on page 30, the prayer Matovu. Okay. The Matovu prayer is supposed to be recited every time you walk into a temple. When you're walking in, sing Matovu. Okay, so you write it out, and that's pretty good, right? Okay, okay, I got the job, Helene, right? Yeah. And so the fact is when you walk in, you are what? How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places of Israel. What's the goodly place? The sanctuary. You are immediately you have that sense that there's something special here by the Matovu prayer. That's the first prayer you walk in. Whenever you walk into a sanctuary, you're supposed to say it, sing it, think it. Okay. Now, after that, you'll notice there are what? On page 32, there are introductory prayers in which you are preparing yourself individually to meet the king. And how do you do that? You first of all recognize the fact that you are who you are because of the king. The king has given you life. Okay? The king has given you health. The king has given you the ability to what? Look at page 32. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, who formed the human body with skill. Okay, the fact is guess what? Before this prayer, what have you done in the morning? You've gone to the bathroom. Okay, this is called the bathroom prayer, by the way. You're thanking God for the fact that everything's working okay. Okay, and well, to give an example, for those of you who haven't been constipated, after the constipation is finished, over, kaput, done, what's the first thing you say? Oh, thank God. Okay, I can go to the bathroom normally now, right? That shows you. Who do you thank? You know, oh, you thank Sinicot. You don't say thank Sinicot, okay. Oh, you thank Imodium. That's the opposite, right? If you go too much, right? That's the dark. Okay, you don't say that. Okay. Oh, you thank God for Whalen's drugs that I was able to buy. You don't say that, okay? The same way is when you buy food, you don't say Baruch atah Publix. I was going to say Walbaum's. Okay, you thank God. Okay. So the fact is you thank God for the fact is you could go to the bathroom in the morning. And by the way, I guess one thing that really brought this to mind, this prayer and the power of it. Okay. And you don't have to do some fancy prayer. After you finish your bathroom stuff, you can, as you walk out, say, thank you, God. Okay. This all seems to be working today. Okay. You thank God. One of my teachers in rabbinical school, Leonard Ravitz, who unfortunately had passed away, when he was going through the prayer book teaching us rabbinical students about this, said he didn't understand this prayer himself. He was brought up completely Orthodox until unfortunately he had cancer and ended up getting a colostomy. And then he understood the prayer, you see, because when the body wasn't no longer functioning in its normal fashion, then he understood what the prayer was all about. You're thanking God for the fact that most of the time we are healthy. But the fact is, and basically this is another whole class about prayer and the prayer itself, is that what's prayer really all about? It's thanking God for the things that we have because we don't deserve anything we have, but we got it. Say, oh, thank you, God, right? What is, what do I deserve to have anything? What do I deserve to have you beautiful people in my life? I'm not worthy of it. But I just happen to be here. Oh, okay. Okay, so we continue. And that's the balance, and variations of this. Now, page 34. We're working further in the sense that, let's say, for instance, you get up in the morning, and by the way, when you get up in the morning, what do you want to do? You want to say, you open your eyes, you say, thank God I'm alive, right? Okay. There is a prayer for that too. It's in the prayer book, I give you thanks, O Lord our God, for restoring to me my neshama, my soul. Because the Jewish belief traditionally is that when we go to sleep, our neshama, our higher spiritual level, leaves our body. And they say in the traditional literature that the closest we get to death in life is sleep, which is why our soul goes into the world of dreams, etc. And we thank God for the fact that our soul has been restored to us and we open our eyes. So you thank God when you open your eyes. Thank God you can get out of bed. Oi. Okay, you get out of bed. Oi, this hurts. Okay. Okay, kvetching. You have to get rid of the kvetching. You say, thank God I can kvetch. Okay. But Rabbi Levin from Temple Bethel, I heard him say this once. When he gets up in the morning, he's lying in bed and he goes like this. And the reason why is just checking to make sure that there's no wood around him. And if there's no wood around him, he knows he's still alive. He thanks God. Okay. So in this prayer 34 is the prayer, and this is very important. And you'll notice the progression of the prayers is that we've all focused so far on my physical stuff. But the question is what right does any one of us have to talk to God? Why should God listen to me? Because guess what? As prayer number, page 34 tells us, Elohai Neshama, that God has given to me a part of God itself, or my Neshama, my soul. That is my spiritual connection with God. That is my provider, okay? And therefore, that's my cable box, okay, that I can get the signal, but this signal I can also signal back, okay? And so this is my AT&T, this is my T-Mobile, my Neshama, okay? And it works better than any of them. And so I want to thank God for that. Because without my Neshama, I wouldn't, number one, think of any of this, but this, you can see how it's leading up from the physical and now into the spiritual. Pages 36 through, let's see, a couple of pages there. Page 42 are the blessings for the morning, the blessings of the day. Each one of them is thanking God for the fact that, guess what? God blesses God what? God gives sight to the blind. God clothes the naked. God gives strength to me physically. Okay, it's all about every one of them. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Every one of them is giving thanks to God for our physical environment, because our physical environment enables us to reach God. Because through what? What do we have in our Jewish life that connects us to God? Mitzvot. Our neshama, and the neshama can't do anything without what? A body. Okay? You need a body to do mitzvot. A disembodied soul cannot light Shabbat candles. If you don't have a body, you can't light Shabbat candles. If you don't have a body, you can't drink Kiddush. If you don't have a body, you can't visit the sick. You can't do anything, garnished, right? So you need to have a body, and you're giving thanks to God for the body and these. Carol, you have something to say, or just continue? So, yeah, Carol. Oh, that's it. Oh, you're raising your hand. Oh, thank God you can raise your hand. That's what it was. Yeah.
Rather than mumble through it.
You should have a mumble.
Pretty much, you're waking up.
Did you see that you can listen
Well, very formally, open your eyes and realize.
I can hear it.
And then you step down and you stand up and you go step by step.
Exactly.
Reflection of what it takes.
Yeah. Now, I don't know when these prayers were added to the prayer book, and I don't know how long they've been in the book. First of all, there's never been an actual official prayer book before what? The 700s, right? But the fact is that the rabbis are pretty smart, aren't they? Whoever created the composers of this prayer book, and obviously it was probably, and you can imagine, for those of you who have been on a committee in the temple, imagine agreeing on this. Oh my God. Okay, Linda, hold on a second, okay? I just want to go here. If we look to now, page 46. This was brought up in our adult bat mitzvah class earlier today about the Reader's Kaddish. Actually, Laura was the one who asked the question. Notice on page 46, we have the first of what's called the Reader's Kaddish, or a half Kaddish. It takes the Kaddish prayer that you say at the end of services, and the first half of the prayer is here. You're going to notice as we go through this that the half Kaddish, the Reader's Kaddish, occurs, excuse me, quite a few times during the service. Because basically it says act 1 over, curtain going down. Okay, the first act is over. We, as Carol just pointed out, and I was pointing out, we woke up. There's a morning service, obviously, and the evening service would be different. Introductory prayers much shorter. But the fact is that we're thanking God for our physical being in every single way. Okay, curtain down. Okay, Yirkadah, Yirkadash. Now, yes. No, not all.
Microphone.
Oh, you got the microphone.
Jane has it. Jane.
Tomorrow night. Funny enough, I'm also.
Keep it on from now on. It's easier. Okay.
So I was raised Reformed, and before I came to Florida about 6 months ago, I was going regularly to my Reform synagogue. And then when I moved down here, I said, let me test the waters a little bit. So I went to I've been going to another Reform synagogue too. This one I've been to. And so I said,
Which one wins? Which one wins out?
Which one wins out? Oh my God, I'm in a race. Well, you are one of the
Oh, no,
best.
go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
So anyway, so I went to the conservative synagogue in Boca Raton, B'nai Torah. And I noticed, because I know some people that are congregants, they continue to say the Kaddish throughout the services.
That's this.
Yeah, but it's more pronounced. It just seems like I noticed it.
Yeah.
Like very,
Well, yes, you'll see. Now, even the Reform service, they still have this. Okay, we don't necessarily do this whole service even here. I be at the service, but the fact on Saturday mornings. But the fact is that yeah, you'll hear the Kaddish many more times, especially in a conservative or Orthodox again, because they indicate the change of the acts. Because now, if you turn the page, what does it say? Page 50, Pesukei de Simra. You're now going to have a large section, a large number of prayers or pages with prayers from particularly the book of Psalms. Because now we're finished with ourselves. Okay, we got to move to God. And so we want to praise God for all of the things. Notice on page 50, blessed is the one who spoke and the world came to be. Blessed is the one. Blessed is the one who continued the author's creation. Page upon page of quotations from the beautiful book of Psalms in which we acknowledge God as the creator, as the sustainer of life, as the king, the one who is what? The one who is in charge. Okay? And that's very important because now, once again, we come to the Baruch Hu on, oh, by the way, before that, page 57. So here's the Reader's Kaddish again. Okay? Notice, curtain down, Act 2 is over, Act 3 comes, curtain up, here's Gedal, 57, Reader's Kaddish again. There's a mourner's Kaddish, which is longer, which occurs at the end of the service. Actually, in an Orthodox service, the mourner's Kaddish is said a couple of times during the service itself. The rabbis say, please, mourners, please stand, or they do. They know to do that. As well as there's also a Kaddish to Rabbanan, which is an even longer Kaddish, which has a whole paragraph that God should bless rabbis and scholars and teachers and some people like that. Like me. Okay. And then page 58, the Baruch Hu. Okay. Eric. Yeah, catch.
So what is it about the Kaddish that it is the reason for the separation? What makes it, there's something special about it as to why it becomes the one separating different parts of
Well,
the service?
interestingly enough, I don't want to get too, I'm getting late already, got to stop soon. But the Kaddish was originally said as a way of thanking God for the teachers who've taught us. So it was going back to ancient times. Basically, first of all, the prayer does not mention the word death at all. And that is because it really is thanking the teachers who came before us for their lives. And we sanctify their lives by learning their teachings and fulfilling them in our lives. And that's the purpose of the mourner's Kaddish. It wasn't mourners at all. It was in celebration of our teacher's life. Whether the teacher was alive or passed away, doesn't matter. Same thing. And then it became, obviously, was something that I guess was easily enough to split in half and doesn't relate to death and use it as the divider between parts of the service. Okay. Again, I must admit, I don't know exactly when that occurs because you can see there's so many parts of the service that would be a very involved class to say the least. And I'm not an expert in that. Okay, so now on pages 59 through 63, you have specific prayers for the morning. You give thanks to God for the morning. The fact is the beautiful day and God's creative process, which begins, thank God, every single day. And then page 64. And by the way, what I've just described to you, it doesn't matter. You can go into a Chabad synagogue. You can go into Orthodox. You can take a trip back to Brooklyn and go to Borough Park and go into Satma, Hasidim. It doesn't matter. What I've just taken you through is this in every one of those temples, synagogues, every single one of them. Okay, page 64, the Shema. Okay, we know about that. Okay, and again, we know about how ancient that is. And again, the Shema is not said to God, it's said to each other. And you'll notice that Friday night, sometimes I'll say, please, if those of you, whose custom is to stand, not stand, there actually was a debate amongst the rabbis 2,000 years ago about standing or sitting for the Shema. The custom in Babylonia was to stand for the Shema. The custom in Jerusalem was to sit for the Shema. Differences. Okay. Our Judaism today is basically the inheritance of Babylonian Jewish life, not Jerusalem. But Barbara. Good, Marge. Okay.
I know there's a tradition of closing your eyes when you say the Shema. Can you talk about why that is?
Well, the idea is focusing. After all, if your eyes are open, you're looking everywhere, you're observing things are coming into you, stimuli, but you close your eyes in order to focus more on the words of the Shema. There were some Hasidic teachers who would say that when you say the Shema, you should say it with such fervor that literally, if that was the last moment of your life, you're giving your life up. And by the way, I'm sure you're all familiar, the last words you're supposed to say before you die are the words of the Shema. Or if you cannot say them, someone else should say them for you. Yeah. So it's the idea of kavanah is called kavanah or focus or meditation, mindfulness. Okay?
Don't close their eyes at all. Some people close their eyes, and some people cover their eyes.
Yeah, same idea. And some people take the talit and put it up to their eyes to cover their eyes with the talis. There are all these variations.
Can you just close your eyes, or do you have
That's
to
what I
do
do.
anything? Yeah,
That's like
but I
just close my
noticed
eyes.
some people firmly just really
Yeah,
cover
there's
their
different.
eyes.
You have all those differences, which is certainly is okay.
I believe that when you say the Shema, you're trying to connect yourself to God. And that in whatever way you're able to concentrate, you should do that. And also that you should try in your mind to connect every person in the room to be able to be heard by the Holy One.
Certainly, a very nice idea. But the idea is, Bob, it's based upon the idea of people's differences of doing this or not doing it, obviously. Certainly, you'll see this more in a traditional setting than in Reform. But again, you close your eyes, you're less distracted. That's the reason. Okay. And obviously, after that, you have the V'ahavta prayer. We know that. And if we continue, then something very interesting is going to happen. When you get to page 72, the Mi Chamocha. Up until now, we have been an individual first in the beginning, physically. We wake up in the morning, right, and all that. And then we acknowledge God and our connection with God. So we're now moving beyond ourselves a little bit. But so far, there really has been very little connection with what? The people of Israel, right? I mean, obviously, you're in a communal setting. Oh, there are all these prayers just now, except for the Baruch Hu, you could say when you're at home by yourselves. However, the Mi Chamocha is the first time that we actually begin to attach ourselves to the people of Israel. Why? Because the Mi Chamocha is all about the Passover, remember? That's the prayer that was said after our ancestors were able to successfully get through the Red Sea and succeed in securing their freedom, thanks to God. And they offer the words of thanksgiving, Mi Chamocha, as what? As a people of Israel. And notice even in this English translation, the last paragraph, Rock of Israel, rise in support of Israel. This becomes very important because of the tefillah. Turn page 74. So now, you learned something today. One of the most ancient, 2,000, anyone would say to you, well, what parts of the service are really old? Number one is, what have you learned today? Shema, definitely. What's the other part? This part here, the tefillah. The Shema is probably the oldest, but the tefillah is next, was written by Rabbi Gamliel. You have to remember his name. Remember my name. 2,000 years ago. Okay. This is the part called the 18 benedictions, although I think it's 13 benedictions on Shabbat, less benedictions on the Sabbath, because you can't ask God to work. You can ask God to work for you during the rest of the week. Now, these words here, they are the most important words of this prayer. Why? Because as the Kabbalists point out, and this is not, I can't go into this now, It's very complex. But for instance, you are now coming to the door of the palace. You knock, and you can't. No one answers it. But then you notice that there's a security keyboard to push buttons in. You know, numbers. Okay, to get in. Okay. It's very funny. In Delray Medical Center, they have a kosher room. And it was very cute. The kosher room, because I don't want everyone going in there taking the kosher food, or just, if not kosher, just take it. So they have, what's their security? They have a little box with, 1, 2, 3, 9 numbers, and you push them, right? But the code is written on top in Hebrew letters, okay? They just changed it, but it was before that, it was Hey Gimel Aleph, 5, 3, 1, okay? So the security is you got to know the code, okay? So Adonai Safatai, that's the code. That's the thing to press. This really, because what? Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. This is the key to get into the palace, which is why many Hasidic communities and whatnot, they pray this with such, going back to Barbara's question, with such fervor, okay, that because this is the way to get in. You just can't saunter into God's palace. Okay, now, next part, page 76. If we're going to try counting this to the best of my ability, I wasn't good in math, but the fact is you have 18 benedictions. Okay, but the first part, remember, why is the Micha Mocha there? Well, you can ask the question, what is the Micha Mocha doing in the place where it is? Why all of a sudden are we connecting ourselves to the people of Israel? It's because if you look in the English to make it easier, because it says what? God of our fathers and mothers, God of Abraham, Isaac, God of Jacob, God of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, the great, mighty, and awesome God, transcendent God, who bestows loving kindness, creates everything out of love, and remembers the love of our fathers and mothers, and brings redemption to their children's children for the sake of the divine name. Why did the rabbis 2,000 years ago put this in? Because many people feel totally unworthy before God. How many people during my career have said, why would God, if I pray, God, help me, I'm going for surgery tomorrow, why is God going to hear me? Why is he going to listen to me? Who am I? I'm nothing. Okay? Well, if there are moments when a Jew says, I am nothing, and again, I'm not extending this to what, and the question is, what about non-Jews, okay? But this prayer is written for Jews because it says, guess what? You cannot be a nothing because you're a Jew. And because even if you are, the Yiddish word for bastard is mamzer, even if you're a mamzer and Bernie Madoff, he should rest sort of in peace, okay? Even if you're Bernie, it doesn't matter what kind of a Jew you are, guess what? You're still worthy because guess what? You are the child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. And because of their worthiness, in the Yiddish word or the Hebrew is zechut, because of their worthiness, whether they were, and not to get a discussion about them, okay, but because they were worthy, you are worthy. That expression in AANA, OA, God doesn't make junk. Okay, well, guess what? Because you're a Jew, you can't be junk. You're a child. You're a child of God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the whole God's Mishpocha there. Okay. That's why this prayer is so important and why you need the Micha Mocha, because we have to attach ourselves. We are a people of Israel, and each one of us is a citizen. Yeah. I got it. Yeah.
So does that go back to being chosen people?
Well, the question is, what are we chosen for? Suffering? It's the old joke. Yeah. Well, we chose God, actually. Whatever.
So is that the original promise that God made to Abraham?
Yes.
What does that have to do with the divine name? He says, for the sake of the divine name, is that God's word?
Yes, because for God's sake, it's not, yes, for the sake of God's promise to us. But even more so, the basic bottom line is that we also played out our part in that bargain, and that our ancestors lived up to it even if we're not. Okay? So I just want to point out how powerful this prayer is. And unfortunately, services are tough because we're moving forward in the service. There's so much going on, especially at our services here at Temple Sinai. But you can see how powerful these messages are. Okay. And now I'm going to continue. I'm going to end in 5 minutes. Okay. So anyway, obviously, page 78, we're familiar with these words in here. Page 82, the Kedusha. We're now really into the holiest part. The Kedusha means the prayers of holiness. What I do is when I'm up there, when I'm at that part in the service, some of you might have noticed, I put the talit over my head to try to further focus myself onto God. I picked that up from some Orthodox, whatever service I went to, where everyone does that. Okay, everyone does. All the males do it. Because obviously in Orthodox, females wouldn't have a talit on anyway. But you want to get closer to God. And actually, sometimes, and depending, I'm not commenting on Cantor Dan or anything, but there are some times that I've been with some of the great cantors of the world in Jerusalem and other places, where literally I'm so taken in, I'm actually almost swept off my feet into the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And I actually can see the temple there, and I'm at the doors of the temple. This is the holiest part of the service, the Kedusha, which is why we all stand. And also, if there's a custom in the words in English, holy, holy, holy is Adonai Tzavaot. One of the customs is to stand up, right, raise yourself on your toes 3 times, because you're ascending to the holy place, Kedusha. Okay. And then there are the 18 benedictions. So let's count page 84. 1, 2. First one is knowledge and understanding. 2, return to the Torah. 3, forgive us. 4, take note of our afflictions, who redeems Israel. Number 5, next page, right. Number 5, 86, healing. Number 7, bless this year. Number 4, proclaim freedom. Number 7, proclaim freedom. Number 8, who loves righteousness and justice. Number 9, banish the wicked from the earth. Number 10, blessed are you, the stay and staff of the righteous. Number 11, return to, who causes salvation to flourish. What's that, number 10? Okay, number 11, blessed are you who hears prayer. Oh, man, get there. 11? Wow, it's a lot more left, huh? Okay, number 12, the bottom of page 92, return to Zion. Number 12, page 94, number 13, blessed are you who is worthy of thanksgiving. That's 13, right? The prayer for peace. And 14, prayer for peace on page 96. What? Shalom Rav, right. Well, I only got to 14. But there are 18 benedictions. 14, right. And then you have, what's that? Jane. And actually, if you think about it, if you turn back to the beginning one, Baruch Atah Adonai, you have the brachot there. Okay, that's the 4 or more. You have 18. Okay. The opening ones, Baruch Atah Adonai. Okay, there are 4 Baruch Atahs there, and therefore you have the 18. Okay, you have 18 benedictions. 18 times that you say bracha. All right. So you have them that written by, obviously, Rabbi Gamliel 2,000 years ago. Yeah, right there. And they were less on Shabbat, again, because you can't ask God to work for you.
Which are the work ones?
What?
What do you mean by work for us?
Well, here you're asking for abundance. You can't ask for certain things on Shabbat, even from God. You can ask God for healing, the Shabbat prayer before the Torah, but you can't ask God to make sure that your stock portfolio is doing well on Shabbat.
Which one's that?
It's there. You don't want to know which one that is? Yeah, anyway, abundance. The one about abundance. Okay. Anyway, notice how the service works. Okay, everyone following this, right? Because these are literally the times. And by the way, if you go back to the one Shomea Tefillah on page 90, in an Orthodox service, we put the silent prayer at the end of this whole part, right? But in an Orthodox service, after Shema, Baruch Atah Adonai, the bottom of page 90, blessed is Adonai, who hearkens to prayer. If you have any personal prayers you want to put in, that's where you put them in an Orthodox service. So even an Orthodox service, as structured as it is, is that they allow for personal prayer as well, just to talk to God. Okay, but all of these things you're talking to God. Hopefully, for instance, when you say a prayer for the sick, hopefully you're thinking of that. When you're saying a prayer for peace, hopefully you're thinking of that. And I'm not going to go through the whole story, but I once attended, thank God, a Kabbalistic service inside the Western Wall, and the service started at 5 a.m., a Saturday morning service, and ended at noon. It was a 7-hour service. So let me tell you, we didn't fly through anything. We actually prayed with a great deal of kavanah, of concentration and mindfulness, a 7-hour Shabbat service. Yeah, but that's when it's meaningful. The problem is, in a congregational setting in a modern world, you can't do that anymore. And we couldn't do that, I don't think. People be walking out on me in Cantor Dam. Yeah, most definitely. Okay, so then, of course, just to finish this off, how then does the service end? Leaving aside the Torah service part or any other special things for any parts of the year, how do we end the service? Aleinu. So notice what we do is, just as we began by acknowledging the presence of God, we're now what? We're now leaving. And so therefore, we say, Aleinu l'shabeach l'adonai, God is, all right? The God who is all, we give praise and thanks to you. What do we do? We vanachnu korim, we bow before you, right? So just the service actually is a symphony, in a sense. If you think about the parts of it, we have to enter, we have to see who we are, enter into God's presence, acknowledge God, and then we can talk to God, and then we're leaving God. And so again, we say, thank you, God, for hearing me. And you are the God of all, and I thank you, and I praise you. And then, of course, what comes after Aleinu? Kaddish. Now, notice how in everything, the rabbis composed this magnificent spiritual symphony, okay? Everything has a meaning. If you look at the Kaddish and the ending of the Kaddish, what happens? The last prayer, there's a choreography to this as well. You take 3 steps backwards. Osei, Shalom, Bim Romav, Hu, Yaseh Shalom, or Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'Meru, Amen. Okay. So then basically what you're doing is you're leaving, I'm saying, by God, Osei, make peace in the world, and I hope it all works out. And God, who is everywhere, I praise you. And then someone asked me, but why do you take 1 step closer? Because guess what? I'm saying, you know something, God, I really don't want to leave your presence. I really love being with you, and therefore I want to really get close to you and keep you with me. Okay? I love you. Okay? So there's that 1 step closer because you really don't want to leave the presence of God. But guess what? Obviously, the beauty is when you leave, you've taken God's presence with you, obviously. Okay. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Right. Yeah.
years ago, I never noticed that when we were saying the end of the Kaddish, that people would take 3 steps backwards.
Right.
And I only noticed it like 5 years ago when I started coming here all the time.
Okay.
And which foot do you start on? And
Left.
which way do you bow first?
Oh, okay. Left, right, left, right, left, right. Okay. Then you bow to your left, you bow to your right, you bow to the center.
Left, right, center.
Yeah. Okay.
But do you only take 3 steps? or
Yes.
took a lot?
I can't think of. No, it's 1, 2, 3.
Oh, so it's like
Yeah.
6.
Yeah. Well, it's like
One, two,
graduation.
three.
Da, 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 da. So the question is obviously 6 steps, but it's really just 1, 3. Come together, back together. Right. Do the hokey pokey. Yeah, okay. You got it?
Also,
Yeah, but again, these are individual practices. Someone actually, I was speaking this past Monday, doing my comedy routine, which I should do here sometime, right? My fun life as a rabbi. Okay, but the fact is, someone asked me because I used to for 5 years I went to services every single Saturday morning at Anshe Shalom. Okay, and they said to me, "Where did you pick? Did you miss the grown-up Orthodox putting the thing over your head and all the davening and banging?" And I said, "No, because I pick it up. To me, it's meaningful. It doesn't mean to you it is. Okay, but the fact is I could hold it in and not share it with any of you. But the point is that I grew up as Reform a Jew as anyone could ever imagine, and yet to me, I do these things. And I'm very contradictory because I don't do everything one should do, one could do, but that's because I'm living a life that I feel comfortable with. And I think that's the whole point of being a Reformed Jew.
I have one more
And last
question,
comment, I guess,
one more question about Kaddish. You said earlier that you do not say the Kaddish unless you have a minyan.
An Orthodox, not Reform.
Oh, okay.
Reform has no concept of the minyan whatsoever. And therefore, if there's one person you can say Kaddish, or you by yourself say Kaddish.
Well, when I lit my yahrzeit candle for my
Yeah, of
father,
course.
I said Kaddish.
Yeah, Reform Judaism did away with the minyan, and the minyan is a wonderful invention, actually, because it makes people feel guilt-ridden, and Jews are very guilty, right, Rich? Yeah, we can become very guilt-ridden, and basically the purpose of the minyan is to say, let's say you're tired, you don't feel like waking up early to go to shul, okay? But you know that Irving's father died, and if you might be the one to prevent Irving to say Kaddish for his father, so you're going to go. Is that bad? No, it's actually great. But a Reformed Judaism would never go over. Never.
Just a quick thing, I was told at one point, we had so few congregants coming on Friday nights that in order to have a minyan, we actually could count the Torahs.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can count a Torah as a person. However, as I remember going to the small Chabad place in Patchogue, we live in Long Island, and there were some times, on Shabbat morning, he didn't get a minyan. And we wait around. You can do all the prayers up to the Baruch Hu, and then you can't do the Baruch Hu without a minyan, so you wait around, hoping some people show up. And he had, I think, 2 Torah scrolls. So I said, well, we got 8 people. Can you count those 2? And he said, I won't, because that'll give people an excuse. And I'll say, sure, I don't have to show up. They got a Torah scroll. I mean, in Bnei Israel, we had 9 Torah scrolls. Here we have 4 of them, and then that gets, and the rabbi was right. You don't want to get, if you're having a system of a minyan, you don't want to give people an easy out. Exactly. Yeah. Everyone, hope you enjoyed all this. And shalom. See you tomorrow night, Shabbat. Don't forget. Women's Seder, Sunday. And Shabbat morning services. Yes, of course.
Rich, you didn't put your email address. You didn't put your email.
I'm busy.
Just to let you know when the services are, we just emailed.
Thank you.